The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we depend on you for every good gift, for each day of life, for every breath we take, and we give you thanks. We give thanks for the blessings that fill our lives, for the gifts of family and friends, for the wonders of creation, for diverse talents and abilities. We give thanks for shelter over our heads and for food that fills our bellies. We are mindful of the most vulnerable in our state. We are mindful of those who lack shelter today. We remember that there are those who lack food. We know that there are those who need care for broken bodies and ailing minds. We pray for all who live in Minnesota, for the powerful and the powerless. And we give thanks for a system of government that gives all people a voice. We ask that your blessing be with the members of the House of Representatives today and throughout the legislative session as they do the work of the people. We pray that the needs of the state of Minnesota may be addressed. We pray for open ears and open hearts. We pray for respectful, honest debate and for discerning minds. We pray for the courage of conviction and for courage that allows a change of heart. We pray for a healthy process, for healthy government, and for a healthier state of Minnesota because of the work of this House. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Reverend Todd Smith Lippert, First United Church of Christ, Northfield, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 88th session, 2013, 17th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Thursday, February 21st, 2013.
If there's no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there's no objection, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading, House File 232.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 335.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 440.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 526.
Second reading. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The Chief Clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 856 through 956.
First reading, House Files 856 through 956. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the adoption by the Senate of the following Senate concurrent resolution herewith transmitted. Senate concurrent resolution number 5, signed Joanne M. Zoff, Secretary of the Senate. Senate concurrent resolution number 5, a resolution providing for a joint convention of the Senate and the House of Representatives to elect members of the Board of Regents of the University of Minnesota. Murphy E. moves that the rules be so far suspended that Senate concurrent resolution number 5 be now considered and be placed upon its adoption.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I move that we suspend the rules in order to take up Senate concurrent resolution number 5 dealing with the Regents election.
Representative Daudt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would support suspension of the rules for that purpose.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails.
Murphy E. moves that Senate concurrent resolution number 5 be now adopted.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I move Senate concurrent resolution number 5 dealing with the election of the Regents.
Representative Daudt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'd also like to speak in support of Senate concurrent resolution number 5 and encourage members to support it.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. Representative Lane. For what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Mr. Speaker, members, I'm pleased to introduce to you some special guests from Manitoba, Canada that are with us today. The Manitoba Legislative Intern Program chooses 6 college graduates through a very competitive process to work with I might say, a very good salary. 1 year in the Manitoba Legislative Assembly. This group often visits Minnesota to see our legislature and government also. I had the opportunity to visit Winnipeg last December under an exchange program through the Council of State Governments. I met this group there and I'm pleased to present them here. The 6 of them are Cassandra Baker. She has a BA in Economics and Political Studies and a law degree. And she has studied European business and culture in Germany and was recently at the London School of Economics where she studied money and banking. Rebecca Bach-Friedman has a degree in political studies and communication, and the University of Winnipeg Student Association gave her the 2001 Women of Distinction Award. She continues to study the French language in Montreal. Marina Goodwin from the University of Winnipeg, where she specialized in international developmental studies, and she did an overseas practicum in Ghana. She has worked with immigrant and refugee communities in Winnipeg. Svetlana Molzinski has a BA in Ukrainian language and Central and Eastern European Studies from the University of Manitoba, and a Bachelor of Education from the University of Winnipeg, where she received a silver medal for the 2nd highest standing. She has studied 5 languages. David Safruk from the University of Manitoba, where he specialized in political studies, and he's continued to work and study in El Salvador. He's been a junior varsity basketball coach, and he's worked with students with learning disabilities. Michel Trudel has his first degree in zoology and chemistry, and his more recent degree is a BA in political science and history. And he has advanced language studies. He's selected for the Manitoba-Quebec Work Exchange Program and has done environmental research in Rimouski. So these are very talented young people who are here to visit us today, and I urge you to give them a warm welcome with me.
Representative Beard, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to a point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, one of the benefits of being a state representative is you get to meet all kinds of amazing and wonderful people, people with fascinating stories to tell. I'd like to introduce three of them to you today. In the gallery to my right up here, we have two gentlemen, three actually, but I'm going to tell you first about the first two. Mr. Aziz Harek and Mr. Yosef Boudlay are leaders in the Somaliland community here in the Twin Cities, having come here as refugees many years ago. More importantly, members, with them is a candidate for president of Somaliland back in Africa, Mr. Jamal Ali Hussein. Mr. Hussein is Harvard educated and running for president of his country to help help make it also a land of opportunity. Members, if you'd help me welcome a Minnesota welcome for Mr. Hussein, Mr. Harek, and Mr. Boudlay. Thank you.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 365. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 365, number 1 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to commerce.
Representative Freiberg, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill will make it clear that Minnesota law applies to remittance transfers. Basically, a remittance transfer is where a worker in the United States sends money to another part of the world. Now, as you might imagine, with an increasing number of Minnesotans who were born in other countries, this is an important piece of the marketplace here in Minnesota. And it's not just the case in Minnesota. On any given day, trillions of dollars may be sent through this method. Because of this, there has to be uniform laws addressing issues like errors in transmission, duties of both the sending party and the banks involved, and allocation of liability exposure. Historically, Minnesota statutes based on the Uniform Commercial Code has regulated remittance transfers, providing protections both to banks and to consumers. The Dodd-Frank Act, which passed Congress a few years ago, made it unclear if any law applies to remittance transfers. This legislation says that state law, basically the Uniform Commercial Code, applies to remittance transfers unless preempted by federal law. The legislation passed unanimously out of the Commerce Committee and is not controversial. The bill has bipartisan and bicameral support, and thank you to Representatives Davids, Sanders, and Hoppe for signing on. There's zero fiscal impact to this bill. Other states have adopted similar laws, most notably New York, the center of financial transactions in this country. Basically, all the bill does is restore Minnesota law to the state it was in before the passage of Dodd-Frank, and I hope members can support it, and I urge a green vote.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Guam moving to amend House File 365, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A13-0079.
Representative Quam, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did this amendment to bring forth attention to the fact that as we get more and more into the electronic, that we do not forget that there could be unintended consequences. I've talked with the author about this, and this is just to bring up the point, and because I had some constituents that had an issue of not being given a paper check, and I wish that you keep this in mind when you do similar electronic bills, and I do here withdraw my amendment.
Representative Quam withdraws his amendment. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 365.
Third reading. Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just curious, and I think I heard you say this, but I'm not 100% sure. Does this only apply to foreign transfers of money? Is this only domestic? Is it both? If the author could answer that, I would appreciate it.
Representative Freiberg.
This applies to transfers made by foreign workers located in the U.S. who are sending money overseas.
Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Freiberg. It's good to hear that. And I think I'm pretty sure I also heard you say that this takes us back to what the law was before Dodd-Frank. If you could just clarify that. I think that's what I heard you say. If the author would yield, Mr. Speaker.
He will yield. Representative Freiberg.
That is correct, Representative Hoppe.
Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Freiberg. Members, I think that this is just the first that we're going to see of the implications for our state, for banking, and for the whole state from Dodd-Frank legislation, from the Dodd-Frank legislation. I am a co-author on this bill. I think it's the right thing to do. I encourage all members to vote for this. I do applaud the author for doing it, but I think when we start looking at what the federal government has done with Dodd-Frank, and I won't go on long, Mr. Speaker, but I think almost certainly we're going to be looking at fewer banks in the state of Minnesota. And when we're from greater Minnesota and looking at a small town that might have their own bank right now, farmers or small business people might not have access to less capital, but certainly they're not going to be getting a loan from the person they sit next to at church or that their kids play with or that they're on the school board with. Almost certainly a lot of these banks are going to be branches of much larger banks. And members, we're not talking about a few banks here. In the next few years, we're probably talking about maybe several hundred banks in Minnesota that aren't going to exist anymore because they're not going to be able to afford to do all of the regulatory work that Dodd-Frank is going to comply them to do. So, members, I encourage you to vote for this and look for more pieces of legislation to come where we will be getting Minnesotans away from the onerous effects of the Dodd-Frank legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members, I appreciate your indulgence.
Further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 127 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 321. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 321. Number 2 on the calendar for the day, the first engrossment, an act relating to local government.
The author of the bill, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Happy to present to you House File 321. This is a largely technical fix to legislation that this body has passed into law with the governor's signature on 2 other occasions. It's the Minneapolis Park dedication fee. And so a little bit of the legislative history. In 2006, the first time we brought this to the legislature, this was a bill simply to give authority to the city of Minneapolis and our park board. We have an independently elected autonomous park board in Minneapolis. And so for that reason, we needed enabling legislation to develop the fee, to give them permission to collect the fee. Then they went about the hard work of developing an ordinance, and we came back in 2008, and again with strong bipartisan support here on the floor and Governor Pawlenty's signature, we passed the bill to enable them to develop that ordinance. So we're back here for the 3rd time, and I think the 3rd time is going to be a charm, in 2012. And there's a couple of issues that have emerged since 2008. We wanted to clarify some language that the builders and the cities wanted. And we also have some technical legal language around the city of Minneapolis being a developed city rather than a subdivided rural area. And just to be on the safe side, we want to make sure that that language is in there, so this will now once and for all fully conform to state law, and we can go about the business of further developing our wonderful park system that we have in the city of Minneapolis. So, members, I'll just go over very quickly what's in the bill, the changes, the new language from the previous bills. And again, want to remind you, this is already state law. It's already state law that Minneapolis can collect a park dedication fee. So the new language from the previous bills is as follows. Section 1 reflects the agreement between the builders and the League of Minnesota Cities to define fair market value and allow the builders and the cities a process to fairly reach agreement to the fee imposed. And this is important. It's not often that we can reach consensus between the builders and the cities on these kinds of development issues. They worked hard. They came to consensus. That agreement is reflected in the bill. Section 2 deals with the provision that was already enacted into law. And as I mentioned before, it's just this technical fix. For example, on page 2, line 32, this changes current law so that the City and Park Board are given a direct grant of authority to implement the fee while still adhering to the basic restrictions and requirements imposed on other cities, including the nexus provisions. And these nexus provisions are important. This was a Supreme Court decision in 1987 in California. Judge Scalia presided, wrote the opinion, and that provides the fact that this is there's a nexus between the development and the fee collected, so that this is clearly a fee meant for the people that benefit from the fee, not a tax. So that was the Scalia decision in 1987. And so the attorneys in Minneapolis at the Park Board and the city representing the City Council and Mayor felt that this language was necessary out of abundance of caution, so that it's very clear that Minneapolis is a developed city rather than a subdivided city. And so we set the amount at $1,500 per unit, well below what many suburbs have and actually areas in greater Minnesota. And on page 2, line 32, we make it clear that the fee is charged in conjunction with the issuance of a building permit. Page 2, lines 38, 39. Again, we talk about that fee being named as $1,500 a unit. I know there's some conversation we're going to have about that. And finally, on page 2, line 42, we ensure that this legislation meets that nexus provision. We dropped the words imposition, and that was something that the builders wanted. So again, it improves the bill for the builders who are going to be involved directly in this. So it gives the city and the Park Board authority to impose a fee on new net residential units. And this is something that cities throughout Minnesota do. We simply want Minneapolis to have that authority. And thank you very much for your attention, members. I look forward to a good debate today.
Representative Kahn, for what purpose do you rise?
I rise for a point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Yes. Members, you might notice on your desk a discussion of the pastry, Hamantaschen. Actually, what I'm here to do is to talk about the holiday of Purim, which is occurring today, which is a Jewish festival that commemorates the deliverance of the Jewish people of the ancient Persian Empire from the plot of a bad guy named Haman to annihilate them, as recorded in the biblical book of Esther. Hebrew exiles from the kingdom of Judah who had been living in the Babylonian captivity found themselves under Persian rule. According to the book of Esther, Haman, the royal assistant to King Ahasuerus, planned to kill the Jews, but his plans were foiled by Esther, a Jew who had become the queen. Mordecai, a palace official, cousin, and foster parent of Esther, subsequently replaced Haman. The Jews were delivered from being the victims of an evil decree against them and were instead allowed by the king to destroy their enemies the day after the battle was designated as a day of feasting and rejoicing. Although it's usually against the Jewish tradition, profligate drinking is expected on this day. You were supposed to get so drunk that you couldn't tell the difference between Mordecai and Haman, or in our venue here, you can't tell the difference between Thyssen and Doubt. So, in honor of this holiday, we have the pastry is called a Hamantaschen, which is a three-cornered either hat or pocket. And we have the Jewish members of this assemblage have treated you to a set of them in the back. They're in the back room at this time, and so you may go take hopefully one and think about this wonderful holiday.
So there are amendments at the desk. The clerk will report the First Amendment.
Guskowski moving to amend House File 321, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A13.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the amendment may still be coming around, but I do have a copy of it in front of me here. Mr. Speaker, members, this amendment would require that any parkland that's acquired or developed under this particular bill must not be located within 300 feet of the residence or person designated as a risk level 3 predatory offender under the Minnesota statutes. And members, we do know that the public is very concerned about our public safety. Sex offenders are probably the number one public safety concern that Minnesotans have. And as we look at this Minneapolis park system and its labyrinth of parks, which I understand are built all around the city, that we need to be concerned about this as we see the city of Minneapolis going out and working to build more and more parks. We certainly can't have them building parks in an area that is going to bring the most vulnerable people in the city of Minneapolis, its children, in contact with some of the ostensibly most dangerous people to those vulnerable people within the largest city in our state. So, members, I bring this amendment forward for your consideration. It's one that will bring attention to public safety and make certain, if we do continue with this particular section in law the way it is, that we actually are responsible to those young people within that city. With that in mind, Mr. Speaker, I realize that there is yet another amendment coming forward that's similar to this, and Mr. Speaker, I would ask to withdraw the amendment.
Representative Drazkowski withdraws the A13 amendment. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Leidinger moving to amend House File 321, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A7.
Representative Leidinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Hornstein, for bringing this bill up. We did not hear this in the state government finance, however, so there's several questions that we have about this bill, and I'm not sure why we heard it in state government finance. The bill asks for additional burdens to be placed upon taxpayers, and I understand from you reading your bill that this is the third time that we've heard this. I guess in 2006 and then again in 2008. But you know, the environment was quite a bit different then than it is today. The burdens placed upon taxpayers today are enormous. We're already seeing additional increases from the federal government, certainly from the state government with the governor's proposal, and now this is another burden that we're placing upon the taxpayers within the city of Minneapolis. Representative Hornstein, if I could ask a question, Mr. Speaker.
He will yield. Representative Leidinger.
Representative Hornstein, there has to be more revenue sources that the Parks Board and the city can use for these parks. Can you explain the amount of revenue that they already receive and how much revenue, that additional revenue, that we would be talking about with this particular bill?
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Representative Leidiger. It's approximately $5.9 million. But I find this interesting that you're raising this amendment because in Waconia, for example, which I believe is in your district, Representative Leidiger, you have a park dedication fee that's 10 times higher than what you're proposing in your amendment. Our park dedication fee is $1,500 a unit. You have a park dedication fee in Waconia that's $5,000 per unit. In Victoria, it's 11% of what the property value is. So all we're asking, Representative Leidiger, is that my community have the same ability to impose a park dedication fee as a couple communities in your district, which are actually charging much, much higher, 10 times higher than what you have in this amendment. So while I can appreciate your concerns, this is just a very modest amount of money compared to what your community is charging.
Representative Leidiger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for bringing up Waconia. The city of Waconia receives no LGA, none, and hasn't for about the last 7 years. So it's like apples and oranges. If I'm not mistaken, the city of Minneapolis received an enormous amount of LGA. And I think that there is an amendment a little bit later that does ask that we do an offset, so we can speak to that later. But Waconia, I'm glad you brought that up. An entirely different city. Does not get any kind of support from anywhere. Yet the city of Minneapolis receives, my understanding, several different sources, and the Parks Board receives several different sources that they can use to create these parks. If you would please yield for another question.
He will yield for another question. Representative Leidiger.
And it really has to do with the need. Do you know how many parks that they already have? And I really don't know the answer to this, but how many parks do you have in Minneapolis?
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Leidiger. I don't have the exact number, but it's important. Your question is important because this is the kind of park that is going to be developed under this park dedication fee. These are small neighborhood parks. The fee is collected within 6 blocks of that park. So it's really the users of the park that are paying for it. So it's not a direct tax in the way that you're representing it. And of course, the Supreme Court found that to be true too. This nexus is actually very, very critical. And so, members, I am just going to say, probably for the first time several times today, that all we're doing is Minneapolis is asking, and you have granted on 2 different occasions, the ability to impose the same kind of fees that Farmington collects, Victoria collects, Waconia collects. This is just simply the legislature granting local control for a community. And so I would urge you to vote no on the Leidiger amendment.
Representative Leidiger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I forget, I'd like to ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. There are 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Representative Leidiger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we're asking for in your bill is put additional burden on these developers. They're going to have to pass these costs on somewhere. They're going to have to pass it on to those people who actually purchase these units, or they're going to have to go back to their vendors and redo their contracts on that and ask them to absorb it. The fact of the matter is, this is an enormous burden that we're placing upon these taxpayers, in addition to what is already being done to them in an entirely different environment that we have today. And I think worst of all is that there is no cap on what we're placing upon the city and the park board. They could go back and, you know, today they might say $1,500. Tomorrow they could say $10,000. Why would a developer want to come in and have a development in the city? So, members, I think that this is a smart amendment. I think to limit the amount of money that the park board and the city can put upon the developer, I should say. And I think that I ask for a green vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, Mr. Speaker, let me compliment you on your tie. I like your tie. It looks good. So would the author of the bill yield for a question when he's done speaking to the minority leader?
He will yield for a question. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the author of the bill, you referenced the community, my hometown, where I live, Farmington. You talked about a comparison that you made between the sort of the tax revenue largesse of the Minneapolis government system, the city-county industrial complex, and what's going on in Farmington. Can you explain to the members of this body what the Minneapolis entertainment tax is and what proceeds that is used to pay for? What is that used for?
Representative Hornstein.
I'm not, this is a tax that we have on some of these sports facilities and other things, and I'm not very specifically conversant on that, but I can get you that information.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my friend would continue to yield. Mr. Speaker and Representative, perhaps then you're familiar with the local option sales tax that the city of Minneapolis charges. What are those dollars used for, that tax increase that, again, Victoria and Farmington do not levy? What is that used for?
Well,
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Garofalo. A variety of city services. But, there are other grants and aids that all of these communities get. Your communities get a park dedication fee. And some communities also get LGA. So these are, as Representative Leidinger pointed out correctly, I believe, some of this is an apples and oranges comparison. And I think you're doing this apples and oranges comparison here. Again, members, we are only asking in Minneapolis to have the same ability to collect a park dedication fee as many of the communities on both sides of the aisle represent. That's all this is. Enabling legislation, local control. You voted for it, Representative Garofalo, in 2006. So I'm not sure, why this has become such an issue. This was bipartisan. In the Republican-led House under Speaker Svigum, this bill was heard. We had bipartisan sponsorship. It passed. No controversy. I think we were done in a minute or two. And you voted for it. And thank you so much, Representative Garofalo, for that vote.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to my friend from Minneapolis. So Minneapolis has the local entertainment tax. They're already they're all hitting citizens with. We have a local option sales tax. This is additional revenue Minneapolis already has. In addition, and I won't ask you to yield on this, but we know that the local school districts in Minneapolis and St. Paul, without any voter approval, no voter input whatsoever, can go out and levy a tax increase for additional bonding authority outside of the normal alternative facilities authority and the levy authority that school districts across the state require. You've got a local option transit county sales tax that's imposed there. And now lastly, if my friend would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker and Representative Hornstein, we're coming in with another revenue stream. Now, we just saw that Governor Dayton put forward a sales tax increase proposal, which broadens the base and lowers the rate. It raises $5.5 billion over the next 4 years. But in the city of Minneapolis, that broader base takes place, but there's no lowering of the rate, Representative Hornstein. There's no lowering of the rate for the host of taxes that are being offered in Minneapolis right now. With that tax increase in effect, it's devastating business-to-business taxes. Why on earth do you need an additional tax revenue fee collection system when you already have an entertainment tax? $10 million of bonding authority without levy authority, a local option sales tax, and now the supercharged, turbocharged Democrat tax increase from Governor Dayton in the form of the broader base with no lower rate in Minneapolis, Representative Hornstein. Why on earth, with all that money, all that taxing, why on earth do you need another extraction from the private sector to the public sector?
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Garofalo. And we will just have such an opportunity to debate tax policy and Dayton's tax plan on the floor. This is not the bill. Actually, again, one of the foremost conservative judges, Anton Scalia, said this is not a tax. And you're talking about the burden on developers. The builders have been at the table and have agreed to this. This is a fee charged by people that directly benefit from the park, which is actually in everybody's interest. And again, it's something that all of you have in your communities. So if you believe in local control, this is the bill to support, and I think that's why we had such overwhelming bipartisan support in the past. So this is not a tax. It's not onerous. The builders in the League of Cities and the stakeholders have agreed, and that's what good public policy is all about, members. So it sounds like you're warming up for the tax bill. Good thing. Spring training. And then opening day will be in April, and then you can argue the Dayton tax plan then, Representative Garofalo.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to my friend, well, you're putting the cart in front of the horse. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So you're bringing up these analogies. The problem is you've got tons of bills. Today we just saw the Democrats introduced a bill to expand the alcohol tax, which is a bummer for most Minnesotans who now find out that your definition of rich is when you drink beer. So we've got that going forward. Representative Hornstein, all these proposals to tax businesses, to raise taxes on the middle class, they're all moving forward through the process. This is it's absolutely relevant to what's going on today. It's not spring training, Representative Hornstein. What we're seeing is a preview of coming attractions. And so what you're doing here is you're providing yet another means, another avenue to take money from the middle class, from the private sector, home builders, new first-time home buyers, take that money and put it into a growing, unsustainable public sector. And Representative Hornstein, one last question if the author will yield.
Representative Hornstein will yield. Representative Hornstein, or Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Representative Hornstein, in your best estimate, given your long experience here in the legislature, how many special fees and taxes does the city of Minneapolis have to get additional revenue stream into their coffers beyond the property taxes they offer right now? How many of those do they have?
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Garofalo, I don't have that at my fingertips, but it's not as onerous and burdensome as you're portraying here. And again, I want to remind everybody, this is not a tax. You keep referring it to a tax. It's a fee. We're all asking for just a little local control here. Our citizens love our parks. We are underdeveloped in our parkland in these growing communities, and this is all this is. It's what you passed in 2006 and 2008, and I would appreciate your support. Again.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hornstein, we'll have the debate over a tax and a fee, but I'll just say, I think it's fair to say, and you can say this with a nod to the chamber, this is money that would normally be in the private sector that is now being transferred to government. Is that correct, Representative Hornstein? He's not nodding his head, so I'll ask Representative Hornstein to yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hornstein, is this money that was in the private sector and is now being transferred into government?
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you. Representative Garofalo, this is a fee that developers have agreed to charge new residents for a use that they will benefit from. And so I think it's simply a quality of life issue that makes common sense. It makes common sense in all of your communities. It makes common sense in Farmington. So if you don't like the park dedication fee in Farmington, you should introduce legislation, because under your definition, this would be transferring money from the private sector to the public sector. I don't think anyone in the city of Farmington would want to do away with your park dedication fee, because it works. It works well. People get bang for their buck. Folks love their parks, and that's why we're moving forward with this legislation.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hornstein, the city of Farmington doesn't have legislators up at the Capitol arguing for a broader sales tax and then not lowering the rate. They don't have that in Farmington. You guys have a sales tax in place that will bring millions of dollars into the program. The city of Farmington doesn't have legislators at the Capitol arguing for a middle-class tax increase by raising alcohol taxes. The city of Farmington doesn't have legislators at the Capitol arguing for higher income taxes on business. And the city of Farmington certainly doesn't have this whole host of local sales taxes, the entertainment sales tax, the county transit sales tax, your local option sales tax, Representative Hornstein alone. The local option sales tax is larger than the entire city of Farmington's budget. So these are a host of revenue streams you have going to the city of Minneapolis. You have all these options available. Come on, just Representative Hornstein, give the taxpayers of Minneapolis a break. Just give them a little bit of flexibility on this. You don't need yet another way to tax the snot out of citizens of Minnesota. Please support the well, I guess that amendment doesn't really wipe out your bill. Maybe that would be more appropriate for the closing. But at least put some reasonable limits on your proposal by the in support of the Leidiger A7 amendment.
Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members of the body here. I would like to ask your indulgence in a green vote for Representative Leidiger's amendment. As a member of the Housing Committee, as a member of the Real Estate Development and Building Community, I have to tell you that these park dedication fees are something that has not been established by state statute but by case law in the past. It's been determined that there's substantial case law that creates a 10% valuation for park dedication fees based on the value of the land, not on the finished product, not on the number of units that you have in a condominium. Now, if we're trying to create affordable housing, which is a real goal, when you add fees on top of the end product, you have a multiplier effect that there's commissions paid on the end price, there's return on investment and capital, builder's fees. You're increasing the cost of housing. The housing industry has been severely hit for the last 6 years. We used to build 23,000 to 25,000 single-family units in the metropolitan area per year. Members, we have not in the building industry been above 4,000 units for the last 5 years. We need to be doing things to not making it more difficult to be building housing units, but we need to get all of the good paying jobs, the jobs that pay taxes, getting our Minnesota economy back to work by getting the well-paid carpenters and electricians and plumbers, not to mention all the transactional fees that happen from a positive growth in housing, such as mortgage registration tax, state deed tax. So with that in mind, I'd like you to keep in mind that we're setting a precedent here where we're changing how park dedications are going to be valued or how they're going to be imposed rather than on the value of the land, but now we're changing it to the number of units that are developed in redevelopment. And I would ask that you do a green vote and support a green vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Leidiger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I understand that the Parks Board and the city has this mechanism, and we have to come back to the state in order to set the guidelines. But there are many, many different sources of revenue that the city and the parks have. And I think it's up to us to at least put some limits on what the city and the Parks Board can charge. And that's what this amendment is all about. Let's get some limits on this. Let's ensure that they're not, we're just not going to give them carte blanche to go ahead and charge developers whatever they want. And that's what this amendment does. It puts a lid on the amount that they can charge. So members, I ask for a green vote. Let's get some adult supervision on what's going on over there.
Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Hornstein yield for a question?
He will yield for a question. Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hornstein, and I know we just had a conversation offline. I think I had a little misunderstanding. Can you explain right now what, if there is a limit? This obviously would impose a $500 limit per unit. Can you explain if there is a limit and who has set that limit?
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Dowd. The City and the Park Board have set this fee at $1,500 per unit. So Representative Leidiger is trying to cut that, but this was, again, set by the City Council and the Park Board.
Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would he yield for another question? Representative Hornstein, is there anything in the statute that would limit this? And I guess what I'm getting at is the city can set this at whatever they want. There's nothing that limits this in the statute. And I guess just let me know if my understanding is correct there. There's no limit. They could certainly raise the $1,500 if they chose to do so.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much, Representative Dowd. An important question here because this cuts to the core of this bill, which is local control. There's no limits on any of the fees. The park dedication fee in your district in Zimmerman doesn't have a limit. Clearly the one in the Waconia doesn't. Norwood Young America has $5,000 per acre, so there's no limit there either. So this is really a matter of local communities setting the fee themselves, and that's what Minneapolis has done.
Representative Dowd.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk can close the roll. Representative Dill votes no. There being 57 ayes and 71 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Drazkowski moving to amend House File 321. The first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A8.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, this is a simple change. It changes the word may to must on page 3 of the bill. Line 3.3 says it would say the cash fee must be set at a flat rate fee per new residential unit. Members, these developers who are out there trying to make a living under the oppressive tax and regulation of Minnesota that we have already need a little bit of certainty in what we're trying to do to them here. Now, obviously, there's not much certainty in this. We heard a little bit about that earlier. But this one simple word change would give them a semblance of certainty that the direction of this current legislature isn't providing them otherwise. So I encourage your support of this amendment. And, Mr. Speaker, I ask for a roll call, if I could.
A roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the amendment? Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'd urge a no vote. Changing may to must makes this a mandate, and this is simply enabling legislation. So for that reason, please vote no.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 57 ayes and 71 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Franson moving to amend House File 321. The first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A9.
Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, I hope that you can take this as a friendly amendment. The A9 amendment simply exhibits the developer of land or property that have been adversely affected by light rail construction operation or construction related to the new Viking Stadium. I ask for your support, and may I please have a roll call?
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, members. Please vote no. Again, we have a mandate with the must language, and this isn't a bill about light rail transit or the Viking Stadium.
Representative Franzen.
Hi, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Representative Hornstein, this is a low-income housing issue, so I'd ask that you reconsider your request to have your members vote no. Thank you.
Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join Representative Hornstein in urging members have a no vote. The language of this amendment is at best unclear. It was described by the author as a low-income housing issue, and yet housing around the new Viking Stadium will probably be high-income housing as a very desirable site with light rail transit access and access to a vibrant new part of downtown. It's vaguely written and it's subjective in how it defines, or more importantly does not define, what adversely affected means. Members, I'd urge you, it's poorly drafted, it's poorly constructed. It would lead to not only being a mandate, but judicial interference in the intent of this body. I don't think bipartisanly we want the courts to have to determine what we weren't willing to say or able to say clearly and accurately ourselves. Please vote no on the amendment.
Further discussion. Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Dabney and Representative Hornstein, once again, I just want to reiterate, this is an issue of low housing, and this is not a mandate. Simply, this is just a relief for the developers. If that house gets condemned, it's going to make low housing more expensive, and I'm sure we don't want that. I know personally I don't want that for your constituents, and I don't think we want that burden on the citizens of Minnesota.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 57 ayes and 71 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Detmer moving to amend House File 321, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A10.
Representative Detmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hornstein. I hope that you take a look at this one and maybe consider this as a friendly amendment. As many of the people on the House floor and members, you know that I've been working with veterans-owned small businesses, with MnDOT, and also targeted groups. We would ask that any targeted groups or veterans-owned small businesses would be the fee would be waived for these groups and allow them to continue to expand their businesses and their organizations. And I hope that this could be a friendly amendment. Thank you. And please have a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Detmer, I actually want to take this opportunity to thank you for the work you did last year or last session with then Representative Champion. You guys worked this out where you had veterans issues that you were concerned about and some of the DBE and targeted groups that he was concerned about. A great example of working together, and I appreciate that. And I'm sympathetic to this, but I think this is an important idea that ought to be a little more fully vetted. It should go to Representative Mahoney's committee. I know there's a lot of stakeholders in the community that are interested in this issue. And it's also, again, as with some of the other amendments, kind of telling local cities what they ought to do, and I don't think that we should be doing that in simple enabling legislation. So while I'm sympathetic, I would still urge a no vote and encourage you to continue on with Senator Champion. I know I mentioned this to him, and he was glad that you're still interested in this issue.
Representative Detmer.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know if you look on line page 3, line 5, the ordinance may exclude senior housing and affordable housing and paying for the fee. I'm just asking that we also recognize our DBE groups, or companies owned by women, or any DBE groups, that we continue working with them, and also veterans-owned small businesses. And I know local control is very important. I believe in that, but I think this is something that maybe probably the city would agree with too. I know they were neutral on this bill. The city was neutral on the bill. They didn't really vote for or against it. But please ask for your green vote. Thank you.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much. Again, Mr. Speaker, I would urge a no vote. It's that word must that is in the first line that's a concern. And you know, as the ordinance says, may is the language used for the other examples that Representative Detmer mentioned. So please, again, members, vote no.
All right, seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 84 ayes and 44 nays, the motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Drazkowski moving to amend House File 321. The first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A11.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I heard a little bit earlier, I've reviewed some of the materials about this program and the plethora of taxes that are contributing to the park system in Minneapolis. A Met Council regional parks tax, Parks and Trails legacy money goes to this system. That's, as we know, a sales tax on Minnesotans. Federal transportation grants, that's tax money that comes from the pockets of not only those in Minneapolis but throughout the state and nation. Lottery in lieu of taxes, Mississippi Watershed Management Organization fees, taxes, local government aid in the amount of $7.5 million a year from Minneapolis's allocation, as I understand, goes to these parks. And members, you know, with taxes comes spending. At least that's what we're learning a lot about here in this particular session. Members, the spending increase by this park authority is going to increase from 2012 to 2013 2013 by 9.3%. About an 11% increase in wages for those who work in this part of the Minneapolis park system from 2012 to 2013. I wonder if the people in Minneapolis that pay those taxes are getting an 11% increase in their wages between last year and this year. I would expect that they don't, and they aren't going to. But we're seeing it. Government is spending our money, and they are taxing us in order to provide for that money, members. This bill is going to provide a 2% income tax increase to many of the small businesses that are involved in these developments. They're going to have their income taxes increased. The business-to-business sales tax that the governor's bringing is going to be increasing money coming out of their pockets and decreasing their ability to maneuver and hire Minnesotans, those 165,000 Minnesotans that are currently unemployed, members. And then there's this $1,500 per new net new unit residential per net new residential unit tax that is being piled on top of this. Members, in front of you in the form of A11 is the Small Business Throw 'em a Lifeline Amendment. And what this amendment does is says if you are a small business and you are in Minneapolis and you are subject to the oppressive taxation and regulation that's there, and you're trying to operate your business and keep your people employed, keep food on the table, that if you have 10 employees or less or $10 million or less in development work in a year, you're exempt from just one of these many oppressive taxes, this one that Representative Hornstein's bringing to our attention here today. So I'd appreciate your support for this amendment. Help Minnesota's small businesses capture a breath, members. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for a roll call.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Drazkowski. Again, as with some of these other amendments, we have the word must. That flies in the face of the spirit of this bill and the spirit of what this legislature passed and Governor Pawlenty signed into law twice. It's a local mandate. You know, no other city has this kind of language in state law. And in terms of this issue with business, you know, the builders and the cities have been working collaboratively for 7 years trying to work out these issues. And, you know, Senator Wergen was involved at one time in all of this. And so, again, this is a bipartisan issue. It's an issue of local control. And therefore, I would urge a no vote.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Hornstein, I understand that you wouldn't like state law to tell the local unit of government that they should yield on behalf of small businesses, but that's what this amendment does. Why is it that we only worry about the mandates that tell units of government that they must, at this point, yield to our small businesses that are struggling to survive and come through this economic recovery that is a fledgling that it is? The local mandate here that we're trying to put in place is to bring those local units of government to respect our small businesses and stop putting the oppressive taxations on them that are limiting their ability to survive in this environment. That's what it is, Representative Hornstein. This is a mandate relief amendment for our small businesses in Minneapolis. Do you want to relieve your small businesses of the mandates that this place keeps delivering to them? That's what this amendment does. It allows our small businesses to breathe and hire people and bring us into economic recovery. This section of statute is clobbering them with regulations and taxes. This amendment simply tries to liberate them from what we've been doing to them. It's a mandate relief amendment for our small businesses. Members, I'd appreciate your support. Please vote green.
Seeing no, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Drazkowski, I don't think you've got a clue at this particular point. most developers are a 1 or 2 person office. They contract out all their other stuff. So you've just covered about 90% of the developers in Minnesota. You do it in Minneapolis, but you don't do it in your own community. You pick winners and losers, and I know from past speeches on the floor about winners and losers, you don't like to do that. So, you know, if you're going to put your amendment up, do your homework. Most developers are under 10 people in their office, and then they contract out their accounting, their legal, and their everything else. So this is just the Make Developers Richer bill. Thank you so very much for standing up for rich developers that take advantage of as many loopholes as they possibly can. I have always known you to be a man that likes tax loopholes. That's just a wonderful thing. So a vote for this is to put more tax loopholes and pick winners and losers for rich people. How amazing. I thought this was the people's house, not the wealthy's house. Members, this is a bad amendment. This is a bad amendment that makes developers wealthier and doesn't help anyone else. Parklands. I guess you don't like kids playing in parks. That's amazing. I would never have guessed that about you. I've been in Minneapolis. They have parks all over, and they're full of kids, which is what we really want. We want the kids in the park playing, not out wandering the streets getting in trouble. This is a great bill, and this is what we should do. We shouldn't be putting 15 or 20 or 25 amendments onto a bill that actually makes living in the city a better place. All you're doing is trying to make developers wealthy with this one. These amendments
Point of order,
are
Mr.
get
Speaker.
a little bit over the top.
State your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to a point of order. Regrettably, I wish I didn't have to do this, but under Mason Section 124, Paragraph 3, it's not the person but the measure that is subject of debate, and it's not allowable to arraign the motives of a member, but the nature and consequences of measure may be condemned. By saying that Representative Drazkowski is bringing this because he cares for rich developers and wants to pad their pockets certainly goes beyond the decorum of this body, but it most certainly is a violation of Mason's Rule 124, and I hope that the member would stand and apologize for his behavior on the floor today.
Advice, Representative Mahoney?
Mr. Speaker, I will apologize to Representative Drazkowski for claiming that you're trying to make developers richer. I understand that that's not exactly what you wanted to do, but that's exactly what you did do.
I'm going to defer on that point of order. Members, please don't call members' motives into question to the extent that that was happening. Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Hornstein yield?
He will yield. Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hornstein, I'm the first to admit Minneapolis has many wonderful, wonderful parks. But so does St. Paul. So does Duluth. Even Fairmont, Minnesota's got a few of them. But we don't ask the state to pay for the youth to clean up our parks like Minneapolis does. I wish it's time that we quit giving everything in the world to Minneapolis and their parks. If you want to assess a fee on construction companies, do it. But don't do it to clean up the parks. The parks in Minneapolis are fine. We don't need to pay people to clean them up. St. Paul, Mahoney's got a lot of good parks. He's got Como over there. He's got, Phelan. I think we don't ask for people to pay general fund dollars to clean up St. Paul's parks. I think it's time that we allow the state of Minnesota to either clean everybody's parks up or just quit cleaning Minneapolis's up with youth that are paid with general fund dollars. Thank you.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Mahoney, I certainly enjoy the spirited debate, and Representative, I have done my homework, and as a matter of fact, these businesses are trying to survive out there, and we all know that these are not not businesses who just sit back and accumulate their money and sit back and count it at night. These fees will go and are going currently as pass-through to higher rent to the people in Minnesota. Their costs of rent that those landlords have to pay in order to afford the mortgages on those properties are being passed on to the very people who we think we're trying to help. That's the economic reality. This tax and spend system here that we've got in our state, and especially in the fine city of Minneapolis, is not sustainable. Members, Governor Dayton's tax and spend proposals are not meeting the smell test for Minnesotans. Members, there's a dead skunk under the tax and spend merry-go-round of the Minneapolis park system. And you expect Minnesotans' kids to continue to play here?
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, the clerk will take the roll. Clerk will close the roll. There being 57 ayes and 71 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Anderson S. moving to amend House File 321, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A12.
Representative Anderson, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is really a simple amendment. I'm hoping that Representative Hornstein takes it as a friendly amendment. All it does is it says that if this fee is put in place, that at least the citizens of Minneapolis are notified of this, get a chance to have a public say on this matter, and that's essentially all of this amendment does. And hopefully I won't have to ask for a roll call, but hopefully Representative Hornstein accepts it as a friendly amendment.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Anderson, I wanted to let you know that we're already doing it. This is a elected park board, so in order to take the next step after we hopefully pass this bill, there will necessarily have to be a public hearing and a public process because they'll be needing to approve an ordinance. So we're already doing it. This is redundant. I actually contacted the city manager in your city just to see if they do this there, and they don't. So again, we're asking Minneapolis to do something that no other city that has or many other cities that have a park dedication fee don't do. But the key issue here is that we're already doing it. There will be a public process once after this bill is passed, both at the City Council and the Park Board. And again, you may not have known that we have this elected Park Board, and that's one of the reasons that we have that Park Board, because there's a lot of interest in the parks, and they have a public process just like any other deliberative body. So for that reason, I would ask the body to vote no.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps Representative Hornstein could yield to some questions that I have then.
He will yield. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hornstein, can you tell me, for the city of Minneapolis, with the Park Board, when they do something like this where they have an agenda item up, do they give public notice to all the citizens? Are they notified via mail?
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Anderson, very similar to what your city does and any other local unit of government, the Park Board has posted meetings, posted public hearings, notices given, there are minutes to the meetings, very transparent agency.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the way I understand it, they don't do a separate mailing to all the residents in the city of Minneapolis regarding this increased tax. Is that correct?
Representative Hornstein will yield. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Anderson, just to, again, clarify, this is not a tax. The Supreme Court has said it's not a tax, so it's not a tax. But secondly, I don't know of other communities. I think when there's issues of import in a local neighborhood, one will get mailings, but I don't think that any city, as far as I know, mails to their entire population a letter about every single city council meeting. I may be wrong, maybe that happens in smaller communities, but that would be an incredible expense, particularly in this age when one can find information out online. But I want to reassure you, not only does the Park Board notice meetings, but they actually have a period before every meeting where any citizen can come and speak on any issue. So that's an important part of their deliberative process.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hornstein, can you tell me if this was part of the truth and taxation hearings that were held in December? Did the city notify the public that this was going to be part of their proposal going forward?
Representative Anderson is asking Representative Hornstein to yield. He'll yield. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I didn't attend the truth and taxation hearing, but this isn't a tax, so it's what's that? Oh, sorry. So it's not it quite possibly wouldn't have been on the agenda, but again, it's not a tax.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Hornstein, you might want to talk to Representative Kahn, because I have heard her many times here on the House floor and in tax committee and lots of different places say that any fee is a tax. So what we're looking at here, Representative Hornstein, is actually a tax increase on the residents of Minneapolis. They have not received any notification either through the truth and taxation hearings. And all I'm asking for is that we're making sure that the citizens are aware of it, that they've had a chance to give their public input, and we give them notice. And I think this is just a simple amendment. Mr. Speaker, I would like a roll call on this, please.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 57 ayes and 71 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Garofalo moving to amend House File 321, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A16.
Representative Garofalo.
Representative Garofalo. Oh, A16. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I would request a roll call on this amendment.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker and members, as Representative Hornstein admitted and confessed to in his statement on the House floor earlier, there are multiple revenue streams that are going into the city of Minneapolis. We've covered these, and these are taxes that your constituents are paying right now for the privilege of being entertained in Minneapolis. There's more than a fair deal there. But one of the other things that's outlined, this adds a subdivision 3A to make sure you're more aware of this, that money distributed by the Met Council to the Minneapolis Parks and Rec Board under Subdivision 3 must be reduced by an amount that is levied under this, or assessed or taxed, whichever, the money that is extracted from the private sector and put into government. So that's what this bill does. It makes sure that offset. This is going to result in it's going to help out many of your districts, particularly in the metro area. And Mr. Speaker, members, I'd ask for a green vote.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move under Rule 3.21, motions and propositions must be germane, that you rule this amendment out of order. It greatly expands the scope of the bill.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, is it permissible under our rules for me to ask a member to yield to ask a question about their motion pertaining to germaneness?
Representative Garofalo, no.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, a further point of parliamentary inquiry?
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Do you have advice for me on how I would find out, for example, how an amendment that modifies a section of law that is in the bill is not germane?
Representative Garofalo, it's amending section 85.53.
Mr. Speaker?
Representative Garofalo.
My question, Mr. Speaker, my part of the parliamentary inquiry is, how could I ask a member, when we're under advice, how it is how modifying a section of a bill that is in the bill is not germane? Is there a way that I can do that within the rules?
Representative Garofalo, no, you can just provide me with some advice.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, then I'll offer advice to the Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker and members, this is clearly germane. It's clearly germane to the bill. We're talking about the proceeds that are being used for the Parks and Rec Fund that Representative Hornstein is offering here. It's clearly the subject matter that we've been debating on the House floor. It's clearly within the bill itself. Mr. Speaker, I don't know how you could possibly vote this as anything other than germane, and I would just respectfully request that the author of the motion, I know, being the majority leader, there's certain rights and privileges instilled in that, but I would just really request to my friend that she withdraw that motion. This is a very dangerous precedent in this chamber. We're dealing with subject matter that we've been debating on this House floor. It's clearly germane, and I think that when you were in the minority, the advice to the Speaker and to other members, clearly when they were in the minority, I know on countless times you agreed with this that this was a germane proposition. I would ask you, Mr. Speaker, to rule that the point of order not well taken.
Representative Murphy.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Garofalo is kind to refer to the majority and the minority and special privileges. But as I review the bill, which is before me here, and the references to the bill, I don't see any reference to Section 85.53, which is the section of law you're seeking to amend. And therefore, from my perspective, this does greatly expand the scope of the bill. I'm going to ask that you rule it out of order.
Representative Doubt, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would recommend that you certainly rule this that it is germane. This is an amendment that basically makes this neutral, so that the revenue that is generated by this offsets other tax dollars from this that the city of Minneapolis receives. I also fear a little bit the road that we're going down by setting all these precedents that things are not germane, and we have actually, simply because something's referenced in an amendment. The subject of this is very germane to what we're talking about. Obviously this tax on Minneapolis developers and residents to pay for parks. Basically, this says that when we collect this tax, we're going to offset some other taxes to make sure that it's revenue neutral, and that we're not going to lean on other taxpayers to pick up the tab in addition to this money. So, and I also fear that we shouldn't be setting precedents that simply because we're referencing other sections of law that it isn't relevant to the issue in front of the body. And this certainly references in many places the language that we're talking about in this bill. My argument to you would be, if this isn't germane to this bill, what is it germane to? Nothing. I mean, this is what we're talking about. And if we want to continue to use procedural motions so that we don't have to talk about anything in this body, we can all go home and just phone it in. But I don't think that's what we want to do. I think our constituents sent us here to act on their behalf, and I think this is part of that is being a good steward of tax dollars, and I think that's exactly what this amendment does. So, Mr. Speaker, I would recommend that you rule that this is germane and we continue to discuss this. We can dispense with it in a fairly short order by either adding it to the legislation or voting it down. But we certainly want to do the job that our constituents sent us here to do, and we can certainly have a great debate on this issue. And once we've dispensed with this, we'll get on to many others. But I encourage you to find that this is germane, and let's get on with the people's business.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Representative Liebling, what purpose do you rise?
To raise a point of order, Mr. Speaker. I didn't interrupt.
Representative,
Yeah.
we're already on a point of order, Representative Liebling. We can't take another point of order.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Having listened to the advice of Representative Murphy and Representative Garofalo, Representative Doubt, having reviewed the amendment and the bill itself, I find that the point of order is well taken.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, I would move to appeal the ruling of the Speaker, and I would request a roll call on that.
Roll call being requested. There are 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I would really encourage the body to watch this decision closely, to take the opportunity to review the underlying Hornstein tax increase, and to take a look at the amendment that is before the chamber today. Members, we're talking about the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. We're talking about the appropriations. We're talking about an additional tax, assessment fee, an additional extraction from the private sector to fund additional government. We're talking about that today. Clearly, the position before us in House File 321, the A16 amendment is germane. It's clearly germane. It's dealing with the subject matter. Unless, I know a lot of rules and definitions have been changed in the House rules. I'll ask, will the Majority Leader yield for a question?
She will yield. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, and to my friend the Majority Leader, can you tell me, is part of the rules changes that the DFL implemented this year, did you change the definition of the word germaneness?
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Garofalo, we did not.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to my friend, then members, clearly the A16 amendment is germane. Okay, we're not dealing with slot machines in Las Vegas. We're not dealing with Viking stadiums. We're not dealing with a whole host of other issues that would not be germane. We're talking about the park system in the metro area in Minneapolis, and we're talking about what is yet another additional revenue stream into the Minneapolis system. And so clearly this is a germane proposition. I would just ask members to be thoughtful and reasonable, sensible. Take a look at this and watch it closely, and please vote in favor. Mr. Speaker, can you remind the body what a green vote and a red vote are?
You want them to vote red, Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, that really didn't give me any guidance from your opinion, Mr. Speaker. What does a green vote and a red vote do? I certainly know what you want me to do, but I would really feel a lot better if I knew what a green vote and a red vote did.
No, in that I will tell you. I was saying a red vote is what you want them to vote for. So the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker.
Well, thank you. And I agree with the Speaker that he should also agree with me in opposing his ruling. So, Mr. Speaker, members, please vote red on this motion. Please make sure that we maintain the standards for germaneness that we've had in this chamber. Thank you.
Representative Murphy.
Members, please vote green.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 58 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott, moving to amend House File 321, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A19.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I hope that Representative Hornstein will find this to be a friendly amendment. I think all of you can agree that we don't want the parks, any new parks that are built, to be within a close proximity to a registered sex offender. And this amendment would require that any of these funds cannot be used to develop a park within 1,500 feet of a registered designated risk level 3 predator offender. And so I would ask for a green vote and a roll call, please.
Roll call having been requested, seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the amendment. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that amendment. I certainly share your concerns about this issue. You know, when Representative Drazkowski offered his similar amendment, he said this is a matter of public safety. And so for that reason, this ought to be fully vetted in the Public Safety Committee. It's an important issue, but it doesn't belong in a bill about Minneapolis parks. It should be in the Public Safety Committee. I talked to Representative Paymar, and he agreed with that, and I'm sure he'll be doing some work on sex offenders this session, as he always does. So I would ask for a red vote on procedural grounds.
Representative Scott.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, this is a common sense amendment. This isn't necessarily it is a public safety issue, but this is a common sense amendment. And I can't think of anyone in this body that would want to have a park built near where a registered sex offender lives. So I would ask, again, for a green vote.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I encourage you to support Representative Scott's amendment. This does protect the most vulnerable within the city of Minneapolis. We have a duty to do that as these parks are deployed. I think it would be most responsible for us to do. Members, just to remind you that a green vote will help protect these vulnerable children, and a red vote will fail to do so.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if Representative Scott would yield to a question.
She will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Scott, if this amendment were to go on and if this were to become law as part of the bill, can you tell us how much of the land would be off limits in the city of Minneapolis in terms of building parks?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Liebling, no, I can't tell you that.
Representative Liebling.
Mr. Speaker, would Representative Scott yield again?
She will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Scott, do you have any idea whether this would be, in fact, effective policy? Do you have any data that would show that this would, in fact, help keep people safe from sexual violence or from repeat offenses by these predators? Anything that would lead you to believe that this would actually be helpful, other than just some guesswork?
Representative Scott.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Liebling. You know, it's not guesswork to figure out that registered sex offenders shouldn't be playing near our children. I don't think that requires a whole lot of hard data. And the 1,500-foot requirement on here is about 5 to 7 city blocks. So if that gives you an idea of the proximity to one of these level 3 bad men.
Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Scott and members. This is, you know, everybody shares the goal of keeping Minnesotans safe from sexual offenders. We all share that goal. There's no question about it. But the question is, do we have effective policies to do that? And this kind of policy, I mean, Representative Scott doesn't even have any idea what this would do in the city of Minneapolis. I'm pretty sure, I didn't ask her specifically, I'm pretty sure she doesn't know how many sexual offenders there are who would meet this, or where they're living, or anything of the kind. This is just a gotcha amendment, members. Don't go for it. This isn't even good policy. These kinds of policies, I don't have any idea whether 1,500 feet, where that number really comes from, but these kinds of policies that a lot of places have tried about not letting offenders live within so many feet of this, that, or the other, those aren't necessarily effective policies, because what's really important is that if people are in fact in the community, that they need to be monitored that they need to have housing, better than living under a bridge if they can't find housing where they can't be monitored and so on. So, members, we all share the goal of protecting our communities against sexual predators. We all share that goal. But this is just a gotcha amendment and it's bad policy. So I urge you to vote no.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the member from Olmsted County yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to my friend from Olmsted County, I just want to make sure that I understand clear your position and the position of the DFL party. And that is that the close physical proximity of level 3 sex offenders to our children is something that we lack data on. Is that, in terms of its efficacy of restricting these predatory sex offenders having access to our children, that is your position. Did I understand that correctly?
Representative Liebling.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Garofalo, I'm not going to answer that. I'm not going to dignify it with an answer because it's just a gotcha kind of a snarky comment. I'm sorry. But no, that isn't what I'm saying. And obviously, we need to have some control over sexual predators. So we all share that goal. But no, it's not my intention that anybody should be put in danger, but there's absolutely nothing here to show that 1,500 feet from the residence makes any difference as opposed to 2,000 feet or 500 feet or anything else. So this just proximity thing is just completely without data and it doesn't belong in this bill. We're not going to do sex offender policy in a parks bill.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the member from Olmsted yield for another question?
She will not.
She will not yield. I didn't see that. She actually is refusing to answer the question. Yes, she's nodding her head. She's saying yes, she will yield. Oh, she's saying no, she will not yield. Okay, well, the question I would have would be, let's see, let's ask another member then. Will Representative Lean yield for a question?
He will yield.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Representative Lean, in the debate we're debating today, the question is whether the frequency or geographical proximity of level 3 sex offenders to a high concentration of children is a legitimate public policy concern. In your expert opinion as a legislator, is that a legitimate concern or is it a gotcha policy?
Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And members, please, you should be directing your questions through the Speaker and addressing the Speaker, not another member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Garofalo. Absolutely, I do think that's a major concern. And that's why I do support funding for local government aid to make sure that we can maintain public safety.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for that. Actually, your name came up in conversation today in Representative Winkler's committee. We were talking about the inability to get an Applebee's in Moorhead. And we talked about some of the statewide policies that are requiring that to happen. So I'm glad that you're participating in this debate today. But, Mr. Speaker and members, I would just offer advice to the body. I mean, you're in charge of this place, Democrats. You're in charge of the House. You're in charge of the Senate. You got a Democrat governor. Just take the amendment and take it out in conference committee if you got a philosophical disagreement with it. I mean, you're in charge of the place. It's not like we can do anything. Just take the amendment.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some people maybe are thinking this is just about trying to protect the children. But I seem to remember reading somewhere that said don't put stumbling blocks before others. And frankly, having a park built within viewing distance outside the window of a sex offender, or having a sex offender walk by that park, isn't a good idea for them either. So I would say that this would be a good addition to this bill. Thank you.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm rising to speak to this motion because there's something else we have to take a look at. I know it's important to protect people, but when you take a look at a 1,500 radius, you're looking at a 1,500 radius, that's over a half a mile. And while it may say, yes, we're taking care of trying to protect people from a sexual predator, you're also denying everybody else that's very close to that location the opportunity to have a park that they are able to get to. So I would take a look at this motion as being also an anti-park area. Having chaired a local parks commission in our community, community, we had an objective to make sure that we had parks within a half-mile or closer to all of our residents. And so what we're doing at this point in time is now saying that anybody who lives close to a sexual predator is not going to be able to have the opportunity to be able to be within distance of being able to get to a park. And so this, to me, seems to be a very delicate balance. What's more important, the sexual predator or being able to have people being able to be close to their neighborhood park that they are able to walk to?
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 86 ayes and 43 nays, the motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Runbeck moving to amend House File 321. The first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A20.
Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, the amendment that I'm bringing has to do with LGA. Because, of course, LGA is a subsidy to cities, and all taxpayers in Minnesota are helping to subsidize the city of Minneapolis to the tune of $80 million a year if the bill goes through this year. But I did want to ask Representative Hornstein a couple of questions. Would he yield for a couple questions?
He will yield. Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hornstein, can you tell the body in this last decennial census how much the population of the city of Minneapolis increased?
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Runbeck, I don't have that at my fingertips, but there was a slight increase in population.
Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Representative Hornstein and Mr. Speaker. The population of the city of Minneapolis actually increased by 40 persons in the last decade, from 2000 to 2010, 40 people. I wonder if Representative Hornstein if that's sending a signal to you, Representative Hornstein, and the rest of the Minneapolis delegation for that matter. I think the message is that taxes have consequences, and we have seen nothing but incredible tax increases in the city of Minneapolis for the last decade. People, obviously, we all have friends that live in Minneapolis. We hear about the $12,000 and the $15,000 and the on and on and on that are increasing the tax bill that they are paying for property taxes. So, I wonder if Representative Hornstein, Mr. Speaker, Representative Hornstein, do you happen to know where Minneapolis ranks now in commercial industrial taxes?
Representative Hornstein will yield. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Runbeck, I don't know the ranking, but I can tell you that under the 2001 law, there was a reduction in commercial and industrial taxes, and that's been actually an area of controversy in the city because some of our homeowners are concerned about their property tax increases. So there has been a reduction in commercial and industrial taxes as a result of the 2001 legislation.
Representative Runbeck.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Representative Hornstein and members, The numbers are in. The most recent numbers, these are put together by the Minnesota Taxpayers Association for the year 2011. And commercial property taxes now for the city of Minneapolis rank in the top 5 for the largest 50 cities in the country. The top 5. I think there's a tremendous problem that is only being exacerbated really by this particular bill, so many other new avenues of taxing the citizens of Minneapolis, and I've heard from many of them, and they've really had it, and many of them are looking across to the borders of Edina and so on, and hoping that, or contemplating a move to the city of Edina, for example. So this particular bill is just another pile-on, and I think actually what we've got here is another layer from the park board. So they already do have a property tax that they can levy on the citizens. This is another layer, a second layer that gives them the ability to tax once again. And I guess the question is, you know, where does it end? When will there be enough for the city of Minneapolis? And so I would like to talk to the amendment just a moment, because what it would do then, because the park board actually is an enterprise, all right? They do raise revenue themselves besides the various tax streams that come into the city. But what the amendment would say that for any fees that are raised by this new law, that the LGA to the city would be reduced by a similar amount. Enterprise funds and so on are sources of revenue that do affect the tax capacity of the city, and we certainly ought to have LGA then be reduced by that amount. And I would ask for a roll call.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. You know, Representative, would Representative Hornstein yield?
I'm sure he will. Representative Gruenhagen.
If I get his name correct. Representative Hornstein, according to the figures I have, the parks budget is going from $58,687,000 up to $64,131,000. Would you agree with those figures?
Representative Hornstein.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Gruenhagen, this seems to be in the ballpark from what I understand.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, that's a 9.3% increase in 1 year. You know, personal income growth across the state in the last 5 years has been about 2 to 2.5% per year. And here the park board is going up 9.3. Now, I don't know the personal income growth in the city of Minneapolis, but I doubt if it's any higher than what the state average is. In fact, in some cases, it might actually be lower. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Hornstein yield for another question?
He will. Representative Gruenhagen.
Representative Hornstein, with that type of personal income growth, do you believe that a 9.3% increase in spending in 1 year by government, whatever agency, is sustainable over a long period of time?
Representative Hornstein.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Gruenhagen, that's exactly why we're looking at this kind of a nexus approach to raising money, because this isn't for a general purpose. This actually asks people that are directly using a neighborhood park. Let's keep in mind this is for neighborhood parks. So these people who are using it pay a fee, and that's how we're addressing it. So we have to get creative about how we fund things, and this is actually getting to the issue that you're looking at.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I simply think that that type of increase is unsustainable, especially when 47% of that increase is going for planning services, 31% increase for recreation services, and a 9.7% increase for superintendent office. You add to that the fact that and this says recommended, not yet approved, but wage and fringe benefits would be going up by 10.8%. And I would say that this type of an increase with the additional taxes that you have is going to be a burden on the families of the state of Minnesota. We also know, Representative Hornstein, that developers and people who build things pass their expense costs of higher fees and taxes onto the price of their products. So it becomes more difficult for families to afford housing and places to stay when we pass on these types of increases. I guess in closing, I just say, if we continue to see government grow at 9.3%, these different agencies, the children will definitely be playing in the parks, but they and their families will probably have to stay overnight because they're not going to be able to afford to go home and pay the taxes on their property. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, the clerk will take the roll.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Rumbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, just in closing then, I'm worried about the fact that we are setting a precedent. If this is good for Minneapolis to have two sources of parks income, what is it going to pose as a new possibility for other cities across the state? Double dipping is really, I think, what we've got going here. Minneapolis doesn't need to lead the way in double dipping, it seems to me. They're already getting $80 million of LGA. LGA does enable more spending. This is just more of the same. Please vote yes.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, again, I would urge a no vote. This is not double dipping. This is an apples and oranges thing. The LGA is for a general purpose. This fee is for a specific purpose. We're not leading the way. The reason that we're here on the House floor asking for this enabling legislation is we're one of the last cities to have a park dedication fee. Most of you in your districts already have it. So we're not leading the way in this source of revenue that everyone else has. We don't have it. That's why we're here. So members, please vote no. This is not about LGA. This is about simple enabling legislation so that we can impose a fee that all of you, most of you already do.
The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
And Anderson S. moving to amend House File 321, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A21.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do have an amendment to the amendment. I was wishing that I could just incorporate that into the main amendment.
The clerk will report the modification.
Anderson S. moves to amend her amendment as follows. The amendment is coded A29.
So Representative Anderson is incorporating the A29 amendment into her A21 amendment, members. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, all of this amendment does is it says that we're changing the formula for LGA to reflect these new fees that are part of this and have that as calculated as part of the LGA formula. And ask for a roll call vote, Mr. Speaker.
Roll call being requested, but seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Anderson? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes, 71 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Leidiger moving to amend House File 321, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded DE2.
Representative Leidiger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to withdraw this amendment.
Representative Leidiger withdraws the amendment. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
It was A3.
Oh, here, Al.
Scott moving to amend House File 321, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded DE3.
Representative Scott, it's your amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to withdraw this amendment.
Representative Scott withdraws the DE3 amendment. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Franson moving to amend House File 321, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded DE4.
Representative Franson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I hope that you can take this as a friendly amendment. I believe the language in this DE amendment makes it better.
I'm sorry. I'm not. Could you point out where
it's on the DE4 amendment. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm wondering if Representative Franson would yield for a question.
She will yield.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Franson, I'm just wondering if you could explain what your amendment does for us.
And the amendment's being distributed, members. Representative Franson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Murphy. The language in this bill makes it more clear to the public. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the Representative Erickson.
Mr. Speaker, I have the A33 amendment to the Franson amendment.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, take Scott.
Scott moving to amend the Franson amendment as follows. The amendment is coded A25.
Can I see it now? This amendment has already been offered and adopted. Representative Scott, your amendment. The A25 amendment, Representative Scott.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to withdraw this amendment.
Representative Scott withdraws her amendment. There's another amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Leidiger moving to amend the Franson amendment as follows. The amendment is coded A26.
Representative Leidiger, do your amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to withdraw this amendment.
Representative Leidiger withdraws his amendment. There is another amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Erickson moving to amend the Franson amendment as follows. The amendment is coded A33.
Representative Erickson, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The 833 amendment to the Franzen DE4 amendment would require that those who are seniors living in low-income housing or those living in low-income housing who may be disabled or otherwise qualify be exempt from this provision. And I'd ask for a roll call on my amendment to the Franzen amendment.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Any further discussion? Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have this amendment at all, and I was wondering if I could get a copy of it, please.
The amendments are being distributed. I think if Representative Erickson described her amendment, it would be it's a fairly straightforward amendment. Representative Erickson. Can you just describe what your amendment does?
Mr. Speaker, maybe a clarification on the 833. It's changing or deleting may and inserting must, so that there must be an exemption for those who are seniors or those who live in low-income housing when it comes to this park fee.
Okay, I believe the amendment is out. Members, any further discussion? Seeing no further, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just trying to catch up here and try and listen at the same time as Representative Erickson highlighted her amendment. So what you're trying to say is that we're making sure that if this is development that is dedicated for senior citizens, that we're not going to charge them an additional tax there. We're not going to increase the price of their home. Is that the deal? Or?
Representative Erickson will yield. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Anderson. Yes, but I consider it broader than that. So any housing that's considered senior housing or low-income housing would not be part of this fair market value requirement and otherwise for the park dedication fee.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Erickson, for offering this amendment. I think this is a great step for us to make sure that we're providing affordable housing for citizens across the state. I know that's been a goal for many individuals here in the legislature, and would ask that you support a green vote.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, we already have this. We're already doing it. It's in the ordinance, and so again, you're changing this into a mandate. But I want to just have Representative Erickson and Representative Anderson rest assured that Minneapolis does have this in the ordinance, and we will be monitoring that. But we don't want to change simple enabling legislation into a mandate. And I'll be looking forward to your support of affordable housing as this session continues.
Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I appreciate your comment,
Representative Murphy. For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It took me a little while to make sure I understood what we were doing, but under Mason's Section 401.4, an amendment identical with one previously decided on the same bill is not in order. And as I look at this amendment and Representative Franzen's amendment and the base of the bill, it appears to me that we are dealing with language that is identical to something that we've already dealt with, and therefore would not be in order.
Roll call or something? Amended to the bill. Or voted on earlier.
Members, we are on an amendment to an amendment, and so because it's changing an amendment that's being currently offered, even though if it was just an amendment to the bill, I think the point of order would be well taken. I'm going to rule that the point of order is not well taken. Any further discussion to the amendment? To the amendment? Representative Doubt, you were speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And through all of that, I may have lost my train of thought here. I'm looking for the amendment. Actually, we had a discussion about an issue similar. It's a different part of the bill, and I think, Mr. Speaker, you ruled appropriately on this point of order. But you know, basically we're having a conversation about whether this becomes a mandate. It certainly becomes a mandate on the city that if you're going to charge a fee, that you must do it as a flat rate instead of as a percentage of the value. And I think that's what this amendment gets at. But I guess I would yield to Representative Erickson if she's willing to answer if that actually is the case. Would Representative Erickson yield?
She will yield. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Doubt, you are exactly correct.
Members, just to clarify what the amendment does, it actually changes the may to a must, not in the underlined section of the bill, I believe, but to change the ordinance may exclude senior housing to the ordinance must exclude senior housing. It's not dealing with the flat rate cash fee. Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I was looking at the wrong section of that language as well, so I appreciate your clarification. And obviously, I think that this, rather than take it from giving the city the option to exclude the senior housing, this requires that they exclude the senior housing. And I appreciate Representative Hornstein's saying that the city of Minneapolis is already doing this. If they're already doing this, I think it's appropriate then that we make sure that we codify this into law to make sure that we do offer this as an ongoing protection for those types of housing units. So I certainly don't think that it's a problem for us to make sure that we mandate that this, in this case, that this protection is put into place, because if it's something the city is already doing, there really shouldn't be a reason why we shouldn't make sure that they continue to do that. And we don't know if the city is going to change their mind after we pass this, but this basically just codifies it into law and says that that they must continue to exclude that type of housing from this. So I think this is really a common sense amendment, and because it's something they're already doing, I think it makes sense for us to codify it into law. So I would encourage people to support the amendment.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, on the amendment to the amendment. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. Representative Franzen.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my DE. Thank you.
All right. Representative Franzen withdraws her DE amendment. No further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 321 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion of the bill. Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if Representative Hornstein would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hornstein, on line 3.12, 3.12, where we're talking about that there's going to be joint ordinances passed or adopted by the Park Board and by the City of Minneapolis. There's a term there, and it's that who would be affected by those, and it's saying that any it would apply to any ordinances adopted before, on, or after that date. So I'm curious about the meaning of the term before, and what's intended there. I mean, it sounds like that maybe the city's going to go back and, you know, nick the folks that built properties and so on during the years that this was not in effect. I mean, the law has been sitting there, not being fully implemented.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Runbeck. You're correct that we have the law, but they won't be able to implement it until it's passed here, and that's why we're here today. So it won't be applied retroactively, but you do have an ordinance that was passed that sets out, you know, we talked about the 1,500 and all of that. So that would still apply, but they cannot assess the park dedication fee until we act as the legislature this year.
Well, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hornstein.
And members, please direct your comments to the Speaker instead of to other members on the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I thought I did. Didn't I address you? I don't. Mr. Speaker and Representative Hornstein, so they're not going to assess, but tell me more about that. Okay, so if somebody has a development that's underway, you know, they've been through the processes, they've got, you know, the Planning Commission has said, fine, go ahead. I mean, are they going to be caught up in it at some point then? What, you know, I guess, when does this become effective? Is it when the construction permit is issued, and that is only going to happen after this law has passed? Could you clarify?
Representative Hornstein will yield. Representative Hornstein.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Runbeck, it's for new developments that would be initiated, their planning process would be initiated after the legislature acts and the Park Board and City Council act.
Representative Runbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hornstein. So if I understand then that so say that the bill goes into effect July 1st. So any project that comes into effect after July 1st begins the planning process, they're going to be hooked, but anybody that prior to July 1st will not be caught up with this fee. Is that correct?
Representative Hornstein.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Runbeck, it's also contingent on action from the two local entities. But, you know, I will make sure that I double-check and get that information to you, but I believe that's the situation. But I will certainly double-check that. This is not going to be applied retroactively.
Right,
Representative Runbeck.
Thank you.
Further discussion of the bill. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. A little historical background. When this was debated in previous years, 2004, 2006, 2007, only about a dozen of us who are in this chamber today were here then, and the majority of us voted against. We voted no on a dedication of a park fee or dedication of land. So just so the members know that although Representative Hornstein's opening remarks suggested that everyone sitting on this side who served in those years supported this, that is not true. So members on my side of the aisle, I just wanted to give you a little educational background. Thank you.
Representative Hornstein.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to make sure that people look at the journal, and then I'm not going to name all the names of all of you that voted for this in the past, but just check the journal, and a majority of the Republicans that are in the body now that were here previously did vote for this legislation.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Hornstein yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative McDonald.
Representative Hornstein, do you know what the biennium budget is for the Minneapolis Park and Rec Sport is?
Representative Hornstein.
Mr. Speaker, I think Representative Gruenhagen had mentioned those figures earlier.
Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I could not hear Representative Hornstein.
He said he didn't have those figures at hand right now, but the question had been previously asked twice before. Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, well, Representative Hornstein, while I agree with your bill, I think it probably has some great merit to allow the cities to have the jurisdiction and the right to have a park dedication fee. That's done in the small cities all over the state. I think I voted for a park dedication fee increase in my city when I was mayor only once, because it's only one revenue source for that new construction permit for a new park or an improvement of park or land. I think it's a good idea. On a merit, it's good. However, your bill just adds on more layers and layers of more money. That budget for the biennium is over $128 million. $128 million, approximately, rough math, for the biennium for the Minneapolis Park and Rec. That is a lot of money. A lot of money. I would really be enthused with your bill if you perhaps reduced some of these fees and the tax and the other revenue sources for the Minneapolis Park and Rec. But you're not doing that, and that's a shame, because this just adds more money to the Park and Rec, and it's really it's sad is what it is, Representative Hornstein, because $128 million for 2 years, and now you're asking for every resident and every new building to pay even more for the Parks and Recs. And that means it's going to cost the resident more money for that new home, or a business more money for that new business. And of course they'll pass it on to the taxpayers and those who do business in that. So folks, as you vote for this, just recall you're giving even more money, unlimited amounts of money almost. And it doesn't even say how much money they have the authority to raise the park dedication fee. So if that's what you intend to do, just to continue to give more money, so there's $128 million per biennium, plus yet another unspecified amount that's unknown. I guess if that's your will, then so be it. But Representative Hornstein, I wish that you would have taken out some of the other funding sources, because on its merit, it's a good bill. Let the building developments pay as they go, but yet more money, more money. They're getting it from every direction. So,
Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And to Representative Hornstein's bill, I think we can all agree that we love parks and rec, and we want great parks. But I have to ask, when is it enough? When are we going to be stopping the bleed from the taxpayer's pocket? And it seems like this year all I'm hearing about is more taxes, more fees that are going to be taken out of our hard-working Minnesotans. They're feeling the pain already, and the effects of the governor's proposal and your proposals haven't even gone through yet. Today, there was an alcohol bill that was heard in the Commerce Committee, and this is raising alcohol taxes few hundred% on hardworking Minnesotans. And as we know, alcohol taxes, they don't just affect the rich, they affect the poor and middle-class Minnesotans. So, Mr. Hornstein, I'm very concerned about the money that we are taking with this bill out of our hardworking Minnesotans. However, there is some hope, and I want to thank the opposite party, the DFL party, for coming together and voting on two important amendments, the Scott Amendment and the Detmer Amendment. And I'm hoping as the process continues that we can come together to really think about what we are doing to the state of Minnesota when it comes to fees and high taxes. Thank you.
Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Hornstein would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Hertas.
Thank you. Representative Hornstein, I want to make sure that in this legislation that in fact the City of Minneapolis does have a capital improvement plan in place, that there's a nexus between what the plan is and what the fees are that you're going to try to generate. Is there a capital improvement plan in place?
Representative Hornstein.
Mr. Speaker, yes, there is.
Representative Hertas.
Excuse me, I did not hear the answer.
Representative Hornstein.
Yes.
Representative Hertas.
Thank you.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Mr. Speaker and members, when I was younger, I used to be quite the had diverse music taste. There's a great song I liked by the Notorious B.I.G. called "More Money, More Problems." And that's what we're seeing a lot of in the legislature these days. More money, more problems for what's going on here in government. But, Mr. Speaker, today, I don't want to be part of conflict. I don't want to be part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. I do want to thank Representative Hornstein, although I don't know if you voted for the amendment. I do want to thank the members of the DFL who broke party ranks and voted for the limitation on level 3 sex offenders being located close to park facilities. I think it's a reasonable policy that merits our consideration, and so I want to make sure that I'm part of this process. I'll be voting green on this bill. While I certainly have concerns with yet another revenue stream going into Minneapolis, Representative Hornstein, you have a bipartisan track record of working together. I know on issues of transit and transit development and roads and rails and all forms of government spending, you have a collaborative process that you've worked on. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to include that provision in this bill as it makes its way. Certainly, we don't want to see a Senate file getting filed back at us and seeing a concurrence motion on the floor. We want to see a fight for that in conference committee. My tongue-in-cheek joke about just stripping it out in conference committee. I know that public safety is a very important measure for members, but just remember, more money, more problems. Let's make sure we're keeping a lid on taxes and making sure that spending isn't getting totally out of control. We can't afford a state with government with our guardrails. But Mr. Speaker, today I'll be voting green on this bill.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hornstein, also thank you for bringing this bill. Representative Hornstein, the problems are not with the bill and what you're doing to try to make some adjustments. I think those are good. The underlying policy is terrible, Representative. We are saddling the people of Minneapolis and their businesses with a level of taxation that just is not sustainable. What we should be doing is we should be getting rid of this policy and statute and relieving the people of Minneapolis from the dead skunk that's under the tax and spend merry-go-round. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I, as always, appreciate a good-spirited debate here on the House floor. I think this bill, while not perfect, is something that we have made better today on the House floor. Representative Detmer offered an amendment to exempt business owners who are veterans, and not to put a further burden on those business owners and give them the ability to compete in a way that will help them thrive and hopefully help them help their community at the same time. So that vote passed very bipartisanly. 84 of us here on the House floor said that we thought that that was a priority. My hope is that when this bill comes back from conference committee, if that's its ultimate path, that we can see this language included in the final bill. We also stuck together and supported very bipartisanly an amendment by Representative Scott that said we're not going to invest park dollars out of this bill within 1,500 feet of a level 3 sex offender. So we're not going to invest our dollars to improve a park in an area where a level 3 sex offender lives. I think that's a very common sense amendment, and I think that we spoke here today in a very bipartisan fashion to say that that's our priority. I also hope 86 of us, I guess, spoke together on that amendment. I also hope that that amendment is included in the final version of this bill. While this bill is probably far from perfect, I also, as Representative Garofalo stated, I would also like to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. I know that we're giving some latitude to the city of Minneapolis here, and I would like to see some more protections in the bill. However, I think we can't throw out something that might end up being a good thing in search of something perfect. So I'm going to encourage members to support this bill. As much as I would like to see it improved, and some of the amendments that I would have liked to have seen adopted did not get adopted, but I'm going to encourage members to support the legislation. And maybe I'm going to continue to talk with the author, and if this does go to conference committee, maybe we can improve on some of those concerns in the conference committee as well. But I certainly thank Representative Hornstein for putting up with the questions and engaging in the lively debate here on the House floor about this legislation, and I encourage members to vote green.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I also want to thank Representative Hornstein for bringing forward a bill dealing with parks in Minneapolis. And you've been very patient, Representative Hornstein, today with a lot of questions and a number of amendments, quite a number of amendments, some withdrawn. And I think we've had a fairly broad discussion, not just about Minneapolis and parks, but about a number of other issues. And I think that we can safely say that the House of Representatives is still working for Minnesota. We're still able to hear amendments, some of them political, some of them policy-oriented, and have a decent debate on the floor, which, you know, some were concerned wouldn't happen. Obviously, that is not the case. I'm grateful to hear that there is going to be support for the bill going off the floor. And I'm grateful that so many people on the floor today participated. We heard the amendments, we participated in that debate, we voted, and I think it's a demonstration that patience is a virtue, and we are patient in our efforts. We might not always be patient, but patient as we move forward for Minnesota. So I just want to say thank you again to Representative Hornstein, and I'd ask people to vote green for your bill.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, thanks for a great debate, and I urge a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 123 ayes and 2 nays, the bill is passed as amended and as title agreed to. Motions and resolutions. Members, there are copies of the non-controversial motions and resolutions online and at the desk. If there is no objection, those motions will be taken up first. Seeing no objection, those motions are adopted.
Mullery moves that House File 54 be recalled from the Committee on Commerce and Consumer Protection, Finance and Policy and re-referred to the Committee on Civil Law.
Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, both of the chairs have agreed to this.
Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the motion yield, please?
He will yield. Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Mullery, you said that both of the chairs agree to this, but can you tell us what it is and what it does? What are we moving here?
Representative Mullery.
Members, it's just a clarification on a consumer fraud statute.
Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Mullery. Well, I'm concerned. Why are we moving this if it's consumer fraud and it's the Commerce Committee? Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering why we would move this bill from Commerce to a different committee. Representative Mullery, could you elaborate a little more, please?
Representative Mullery.
Mr. Speaker, it's a matter of civil law, and the civil law chair asked for the bill, so we're doing what he asked for.
Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Mullery, well, I would never want to offend Representative Lesch, the chair of the Civil Law Committee, and he can certainly, he can request any bill that he wants. Will we be seeing this come back to Commerce? I mean, assuming there was a reason that it was originally referred to the Commerce Committee in the first place. Representative Mullery, can you, Mr. Speaker, will he yield to another?
He will yield. Representative Mullery.
Mr. Speaker, I yield, but I didn't get a question.
The question is whether it's going to go back to Commerce after civil law.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hoppe, that's up to the chairs of the two committees, I think, not to me.
Representative Atkins, if that's okay. Okay.
Thank you, Representative Mullery. Thank you, Representative Hoppe, for the question. The answer to your question is yes. It was a matter of I believe so that the Civil Law Committee would have both bills before them, and a matter of efficiency, if either of the bills passes, then would come back to Commerce. Thank you for the question.
Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Atkins. Thank you, Representative Mullery. And Representative Atkins, I look forward to seeing this bill when it comes back after Representative Lesch has his way with it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members.
Further discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails.
Purcell's moved that House File 811 be recalled from the Committee on Taxes and re-referred to the Committee on Transportation Finance.
Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is my bill, and I've talked to the chairs on this, and we just want to move it over to Transportation Finance there and have our discussion there to start with.
Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Purcell shall yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Garofalo.
Representative Purcell, can you please tell us what this bill does and not just tell us that the committee chairs want to have it?
Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Garofalo, we're going from taxes, Chair Lincheski, to transportation, to Chair Hornstein, and the bill deals with aviation taxes, particularly sales taxes, and it is pertinent to a small industry in my district, and this would make life easier for them to keep jobs in Minnesota.
Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, would Representative Purcell yield for a question?
He will. Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Purcell, I presume that this is not a tax increase but is a tax reduction then? Or what? You said aviation. Can you just elaborate on what it is so we know? And can you tell us, will this bill be going back to the tax committee?
Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Garofalo, yeah, your insights are pretty good. Representative Garofalo, it is a reduction in taxes for this particular industry in my district, and it will be going back to taxes. We expect that.
Seeing no further discussion on the motion, all in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails.
Clerk moves that House File 885 be recalled from the Committee on Taxes and re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Finance.
Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to move this bill to the Committee on Health and Human Services Finances, and I've talked with both of the chairs, Chair Lincheski and Chair Huntley. This is the bill that deals with alcohol tax. Thank you.
Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would request a roll call on this, and I'd like to speak to my why that we should vote red on this motion.
There being 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I hope you're paying attention to what we're doing here. House File 885 is a massive, massive tax increase on alcohol, and I think we need to have this sitting right in taxes and take a look at this. For example, I have the great fortune of representing a district that borders Iowa and Wisconsin, and for example, if you look in the bill on the wine portion, Iowa has a $1.75 per gallon tax on wine. Minnesota has a $3.52 tax, so it's about double currently, a little more than double, which we can handle down there. But if you look in the bill, it goes from $3.52 to $30.54. Members, please take a look at this bill. This thing has to stay in taxes. Down in Fillmore County, a lot of these beverages are considered food, and we consider them one of the 7 major food groups. And if you are going to take a tax on sparkling wines from $1.82 to $15.79, and you're going to take a tax on wine of less than 14% from 30 cents to $2.60, distilled spirits $5.03 to $17.82. This thing has to be in the tax committee, and we have to have a little visit about this and get some of our constituents in to vote this thing down. Please vote red.
Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Davids, I want this to go to tax committee, but the first stop should be the Health and Human Services Committee. And let me just tell you, you're quoting on the great big barrels of beer and wine. Let me tell you what this is per drink. 3.5 cents increase on beer, on a glass of beer. 9 cents on a glass of wine, and about 10 cents on a shot of hard liquor. We pay in human services costs, where I want this committee to go to human services first and then to taxes, where you'll have every chance to make this argument, and I will argue right there with you. And we'll get the truth out, what the actual numbers are. But let me just tell you, the cost to health and human services is probably 20 times more of that than right now than the tax on these alcoholic drinks. So we are just trying to put more of a user fee on. When we are sending people to treatment, when we are having people go to jail for violence related to overuse of alcohol, those costs are extremely high. We don't begin to pay for them. So what I want to do is, yes, go to tax committee second. Absolutely. That's where it belongs. But first of all, if you look at this bill, where half of the money goes is to the treatment and support services for people who need treatment for alcoholism and drug abuse. The second half goes to our courts. The costs in our courts are very high. Again, this is a small part right now. What's on taxes on these alcoholic beverages right now is a small part of paying for any of the costs. So I didn't think we were going to argue the bill here. What I wanted to do was to say that before it gets to taxes, we talk about the Health and Human Services appropriations part of this bill, then it comes to taxes. It needs to talk about the court costs and the prison costs, and then it goes to taxes. So that's all in the works. And so what I'm just asking is that we go there first. If you really don't want to have that kind of discussion, I would be surprised. But if that's the way you feel, then you should vote with Representative Davis. I think others might feel like we should have a conversation about the real costs here, and that we go through the whole process, not just one committee. I urge members to support the motion. Thank you.
Representative Davids.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, just to correct my good friend from Minneapolis, she stated that this is on large quantities. It goes up to $30.54 for a gallon of wine. We call that a lunch. That is not a large quantity. $30.54 for a gallon. So when we talk about 3.5 cents per beer, that's problematic and troubling. But $30.50 per gallon, the DFL is going to try to raise taxes on 1 gallon of wine up to $30.54. Please vote red.
Representative Lincheski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Representative Davids was telling you about some things in the bill, and I just want to tell you a few more things so you can understand why, in fact, Representative Clark is right, and this bill does need to go to the committee. She would like it to. There are appropriations for the alcohol, health, and judicial impact fee, preventing domestic violence, chemical dependency, chemical use assessments, basic sliding fee, child care assistance, the Board of Behavioral Health, the Drug Courts, Chemical Use, Commissioner of Health, and House Finance Agency. Members, these are appropriations in this bill. Appropriations. And I hope you will support Representative Clark's motion.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With Representative Lincheski, you'll do a question.
Who did you want to ask the question? I'm sorry.
Representative Lincheski.
She will yield. Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Lincheski, you've listed out a bunch of appropriations that are in this bill. Can you just give us some of the appropriation amounts that are in this legislation for those items?
Representative Lincheski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Representative Clark doesn't have those in here. But what's most important, members, normally if there was a tax cut or raised, it wouldn't go to a committee that it's being spent in. This has a dedication, and that's the difference in this bill. And so after the revenue, and Representative Garofalo is a member of the tax committee, so he knows this very well, that when a committee bill is posted, that is when the revenue estimate is produced, therefore demonstrating the amount of revenue her taxes would raise.
Representative Gavel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And yes, the DFL is back in charge again. I remember back in a previous session, they actually passed appropriation bills off the floors, Mr. Speaker and members. Passed appropriations bills off the floor with dots in them. Sent them to conference committee with no appropriations amounts for education and other items. So I hope we're not, Representative Winchesky, I hope we're not going to be bringing back the omnibus ... bill for appropriations in this legislature. But yep, this is government without guardrails, and the DFL is back.
And the motion before the body is a motion to refer a bill from the Taxes Committee to the Health and Human Services Committee and then to send it back to the Taxes Committee, Representative Garofalo and others. Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know what? I'm going to withdraw this motion and we'll have a conversation about this offline. Thank you.
Representative Murphy.
Mr. Speaker and members, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 11 a.m., Thursday, February 28th, 2013.
Representative Murphy moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn until 11 a.m., Thursday, February 28th, 2013. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. Representative Murphy.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Murphy moves that the House do not adjourn. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 11 a.m., Thursday, February 28th, 2013.